Thank you, Mr. Swarkett. I was watching you in the office, and you knew I had a speech that I wanted to speak on. Some of the exact same things that you've talked about, and they're boring, they're uncomfortable, but they are necessary conversations that the country has got to have, just like families have to have these conversations when things maybe aren't going so right. And so, Mr. Speaker, I rise today just to speak briefly about our national debt. National debt, as it's called, it's the sum of our country's annual deficits over the course of time. Last year's deficit plus the year before's deficit plus interest and so on have accumulated over $30 trillion today. It's a staggering number that exceeds the GDP of our country. If you simply put a 4% interest factor on that number, it is $1.2 trillion a year in interest alone. Now, how did we get into this current situation? I'm going to give you a couple of dates, Mr. Speaker, a couple of numbers. On December the 29th of 2022, the day President Biden signed the 4,000-page omnibus bill increasing spending into law, the daily Treasury statement showed that our country, the United States of America, was at 99.8% of the statutory debt limit. I want to say that again, Mr. Speaker. 99.8% of the statutory debt limit the day that President Biden signed the omnibus bill, December the 29th of 2022. Any responsible person, Mr. Speaker, would have addressed the debt limit before signing an omnibus bill to increase spending. So let's just remember that omnibus bill. Talk about it for just a second. It was drafted without the input of House Republicans. Not a single House Republican voted for the bill. It was crafted by Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, President Joe Biden, and unfortunately, some Senate Republicans supported it as well. Now, with President Biden, I want you to know, I was 3 years old when President Biden was first elected to public office. Together, all combined, President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, they have over 100 years of combined time in Washington, D.C. 100 years of combined time in Washington, D.C. Don't you think they discussed that we were at 99.8% of the national debt limit when they passed the omnibus bill? Don't you think they discussed that they could have put one sentence in the omnibus bill? A sentence that simply read, the statutory debt limit of the United States is increased by the amount of funds necessary to fund the omnibus bill. One sentence in 4,000 pages, 130 years of combined political, 117 years, I apologize, combined years of political experience. One sentence and we would not be having the debt limit discussions that we're having today. I promise you they discussed it. They made a conscious decision not to include the debt limit in the omnibus bill because they wanted to create the very situation that we're in right now, a conscious decision to force the country to the edge of default so they could blame House Republicans for the mess they created. Over the past 28 months, and that's since President Biden was signed into office, Democrats spent over $3 trillion without a single Republican vote. $3 trillion in pieces of legislation that they call the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act without a single Republican vote. This is outside of and in addition to the normal appropriation process, and they did this under the guise of reducing inflation and rescuing America. Where are we after one-party rule and severe government overspending? The debt today, the debt on December the 29th, $31,326 billion. The day that President Biden signed the omnibus bill, that's what it was. The day he was sworn into office, it was $27,751 billion. Are you $3.5 trillion better off than you were 2 years ago, America? $3.5 trillion. On April 26, House Republicans passed the Limit Save Grow Act, a bill that would prevent default and rein in spending, and sent it to the Senate. The Senate has done nothing, and on April 27th, President Biden reiterated that he still would not negotiate with House Republicans. Now finally, less than 10 days prior to the estimated exit date of a default, President Biden has agreed to negotiate. Mr. Speaker, we have a spending problem that's led to a deficit problem that's led to a debt problem. But make no mistake about it, the current crisis that we are facing with regard to the ex-state on the debt limit as a political crisis created intentionally by people that had over 100 years of political experience and knew exactly what they were doing when they intentionally omitted the language from the Omnibus bill that would have increased the debt limit to get us out of the current situation that we're in. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.